Welcome, friend. Tonight we return to Mycenae, 1876, where a gold face rose from grave circle A and the world argued about what it saw. A mask later nicknamed for Agamemnon has drawn a century of whispers about fraud and fame, and now, on the eve of a new exhibition, a louder whisper threatens to close the doors and bury the truth again. If the doubt wins, history loses a voice and a thief finds an opening. I am Snorelock Holmes, your calm companion in the kind of dream where facts stand firm while storms pass. Before sleep takes you, tell me in the comments which city you're listening from tonight so I can greet you properly next time. Close your eyes, I'll carry the weight of the case. Chapter 1. In which a damp parcel whispers beeswax and thyme. The rain that evening arrived as a patient percussion against my study windows, a steady metronome that asked no questions and needed no answers. Lamplight pooled on my desk, soft and amber, touching the edges of little paper envelopes labelled in my own neat hand. Mycenae, Tyrins, Pylos, each held a pinch of soil I'd collected or been given over the years. The scents of old places pressed flat and sent forward like messages in bottles. I turned my pocket loupe in a square of chamois until the glass shone clean again. The loupe is a small thing, but it is my favourite instrument, a clear circle, a calm decision. With it, I can make the noisy world go quiet and meet an object at the right distance, close enough to see its truth, far enough to keep my breath from fogging the view. I set the loupe near a small bronze replica of the lion gate at Mycenae. The miniature gate's twin lions reared above a tapering pillar, just as they do on the real stone, guardians carved sometime around the 13th century BC, long after the graves I wanted to think about tonight, and yet eternally responsible for them. There's a lullaby I hum when I sort things. It's an old walking tune, slow-paced, a pattern of 4s and 3s that lets my hands move without hurry. I hummed it now. A clock in the corner ticked with deliberate dignity. To most, this would be an evening of nothing happening. To me, it was exactly the kind of calm that comes before a case. On the window glass, the rain turned from percussion to brush strokes. Someone was approaching the door. I heard the quick steps on the stoop, a pause, then the hesitant thrum of knuckles. I opened the door to a museum courier who looked like he'd outrun his umbrella. Water stood in beads on the shoulders of his jacket, and his breath carried a little steam from the chill. "Dr. Papadopoulou sends this," he said, apologetic as if he were confessing to the weather. He passed me a sealed parcel wrapped in brown paper, its string tied with the competence of someone who ties many packages and trusts none of them. His hand shook a little when I signed the receipt. "There's a note," she said. "He'll know what to do." He left with a grateful nod, boots splashing as he returned to the street. I shut the door and turned the parcel over between my palms. The paper was still cool from the rain. A faint scent pushed through the damp. Beeswax and something leafy and clean. Thyme. It is a scent that does not yell but announces itself in layers. Sweet first, then green, then a hum that lingers like a good thought. I cut the string and folded back the paper. Inside lay 3 objects. The first was a wafer-thin sliver of gold foil, no larger than a thumbnail, its surface marked by hair-fine striations. The second was a crisp facsimile of a famous telegram, Heinrich Schliemann's message from Mycenae in 1876. I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon. The third was a small, tight note, written in a hand that knew the value of white space. Gaze again. The face is not who you think. Midnight before the lion gate. I lifted the gold with tweezers and held it in the lamplight. Even to the naked eye, there was something unnervingly regular about its surface, like ripples you'd see on a pond if someone kept tapping the same spot. It did not look like the kind of subtle irregularities that come from a human hand tapping a sheet of gold over a wooden form. But I did not judge it yet. First impressions in metalwork are like first impressions in people. They can be honest or they can be loud. The loop would speak later. I looked again at the telegram, the black letters marching across the page. Schliemann had a talent for making the world look. He discovered, announced, embellished. He tunneled too fast when others would pause, and that speed brought both treasure and trouble. At Mycenae in November and December of 1876, the graves inside a circle of stones, just inside the Lion Gate, gave up a glitter of the past that felt like a shout heard down a long corridor. Masks of gold, 5 of them, lying over skulls, eyelids closed or notched in that strange ambiguity that makes you wonder whether the dead were imagined to sleep or to watch. The so-called Mask of Agamemnon, so called because Schliemann tied it to Homer's story, stood out even then. The beard pointed, the mustache neat, the ears cut out as if to free them from the cloth that wrapped the head, the arch of the brows clear enough to cast their own tiny shadows. The mask does not belong to the Homeric king. It is older by centuries. It belongs to someone else, someone real, someone we will never name, and that anonymous man has carried more rumors than most kings do. I set the foil sliver down and picked up the note again. Midnight, before the Lion Gate. The Lion Gate is not a metaphor. It is stone, 12 feet high, with a carved lintel above a triangular opening, and 2 lions facing each other over a pillar that is thinner at the bottom than the top. The gate is the mouth of Mycenae. If a snake oil salesman, if a very modern provocateur, wanted to borrow a bit of ancient authority for a trick he planned to pull at midnight, there could be no better stage. The scent from the parcel had not diminished. Beeswax and thyme. Beeswax is a goldsmith's friend. It softens edges, seals tiny cracks, and, when warmed and worked with a burnisher, coaxes the surface of gold to a soft glow that almost looks like it grew there. Thyme, in the hands of a careful artisan, can be a kind of soothing oil mixed with wax to make a blend that keeps the metal obedient without drowning it. That blend, when warmed by hands and work, leaves a ghost of itself in a room even long after the real work is finished. I reached for the miniature lion gate on my desk, hefted its cool weight, and set it closer. Gaze again, the note had said. I would, of course. The loop would be involved. So would a friend, and a gate, and the particular way stone holds torchlight after midnight. I hummed the walking tune again. My beagle, Penelope, lifted her head from her cushion near the radiator and blinked at me with old, patient eyes. She knows the difference between nights when I work and nights when I wander. I scratched behind her ear, and she settled, trusting as ever that I would return with a story. I folded the paper wrappings neatly and slid the parcel's string into a drawer where I keep cord I might need again. Doubt can be braided and cut. Truth can be braided too, and it holds better. Whoever sent the gold sliver wanted me to look at a surface and see a scandal. I intended to look at the surface and see a process. Outside, the rain gave the street a soft sheen. Far off, a siren rose and fell. Closer, tires hissed on the wet. The clock ticked, unhurried, and I felt the case settle into my hands the way a well-made tool does. No extra friction, just purpose. Midnight at the Lion Gate would come no matter what anyone decided, but before I walked into that performance, I needed the context that keeps facts steady. The dead man's face was a piece of hammered sheet gold. The hammer blows matter, the edges matter, the smell matters. And the men who watched it leave the earth the first time, one dramatic, one methodical, matter most of all. I placed the sliver, the telegram, and the note in a shallow tray lined with soft cloth and drew the lamp closer. The loop rested under my fingertips like a heartbeat. Just then, the desk phone vibrated softly. I did not startle. I rarely do. It was Dr. Eleni Papadopoulou. She would be handling the living side of this old story. I touched the green circle to answer. Chapter 2, in which rumours sharpen and the gold answers plainly. Her voice came through soft and resolute. "Mr. Holmes, thank you for taking the call." Behind her words, I heard the complicated quiet of a museum after hours. Crate lids lowering, tape torn from a roll, the shuff-shuff of nitrile gloves, and the low murmur of colleagues trying not to echo. "Dr. Papadopoulou," I said, "you picked a fine night for a storm." She smiled with her voice, one of those warm, tired smiles that make a person sound both older and lighter. "The news has chosen the weather for us. The exhibition opens tomorrow. Grave Circle A, the masks, the weapons, the jewelry, all carefully contextualized. We've built it to show the world the Mycenaeans as they were, not as Homer wished them to be. And now a man named Sebastian Vale has announced a midnight presentation at the Lion Gate. He says he has proof the mask of Agamemnon is a fake." The name carried its own kind of polish. Vale, publisher, collector, provocateur. "He would like a spectacle," I said, "and a gap in your defences." "Yes." Paper rustled on her end, and I imagined the scarf she was known for, the indigo one patterned with a Greek key, catching a bit of lamplight as she leaned. "We've received a wave of online posts, claims of a microscopic inscription under one eye, claims that a gold fragment fell out during a loan in Europe years ago and that it bears modern tool marks." He teased a proof, and the whispering has become a roar. "Our security is good. Our chain of custody is airtight. But if he sways public opinion, the ministry could pull the exhibition at dawn." "Tell me about the fragment," I said, lifting mine with tweezers again. "Its look, its feel." "We don't have it," she said. "Vale claims to have it, but a courier reached you with something." I angled the loop against the gold foil under my lamp. Through the glass, the striations became a landscape. "I have a sliver," I said, "and a smell of beeswax and thyme." "That scent," she whispered, and I heard a soft clatter as if she'd set down a pencil and leaned closer to her screen. "We use microcrystalline waxes now, neutral and reversible. No thyme. We don't scent anything. Ancient residues exist, but we do not add aromas, and our conservators would never let a sliver fall out of an object in our care." "Good," I said. "Let's test this sliver as a story." I set it on a dark cloth and took a slow breath. I see micro ripples that are too uniform, like a drum face touched in the same way in too many places. Along one edge, a faint shadow of a seam, as if a thin wire once sat there to give structure and then became a ridge in the finished surface. I lifted the loop. Electrotype replicas often have that. Electrotyping is an early 20th century method where you deposit metal onto a mold using electricity. You build a shell. The surface can be very clean, very even, and seams show where support wires or molds joined. Hand-hammered gold from the Bronze Age, repoussé, is different. Repoussé means pushed back. The artisan hammers from the reverse over a wooden or pitch-filled form to raise the face, then turns it and chases details from the front. That work leaves irregularities, tiny differences in thickness, blow rhythms, areas where the tool slides instead of strikes. "And what does your sliver say?" she asked, the quiet in her voice growing respectful, like a museum room when a docent begins to speak and the school children lean in. "It hums in a single key," I said, "too perfect. Near the edge, a seam shadow that belongs to a workshop in a later century. Émile Gilliéron and his son made very fine electrotype copies of Mycenaean gold in the early 1900s. Some have wires at their edges. This sliver feels like that family of objects. not like a piece of a 16th century BC funerary mask lifted from a grave after 3,000 years. She breathed out, a steady release. He's trying a swap, or at least a staged scandal. He draws a crowd with a promise of a revelation. Then he shows a replica fragment and finds a modern inscription on a microscopic level, and the word forgery takes over. "Let's talk about inscriptions," I said, and reached for the third paper in the parcel, a printed UV image with a cluster of marks below a gold eyelid. Vale claims he has found Linear B under the eye. Linear B is a syllabic script used to write Mycenaean Greek. It does belong in the late Bronze Age, but not in the early part. Our mask comes from around 1600 to 1500 BC. Linear B, as far as we know, appears later, around the 14th century BC in palace tablets. Even then, it records palace inventories, rations, bureaucratic things. No one would engrave a tiny bureaucratic note on a funerary mask under an eye where no one could see it. And if they did, it would have to be done with a tool that leaves a certain burr and stroke pattern. Vale's printed image shows shapes that don't even match the signs well. They look like someone copied from a chart without understanding how the strokes work. "Thank you," she said softly. "I needed that put in one breath." "Let's put a few more breaths together," I said. "Context calms everything." In 1876, Heinrich Schliemann excavated at Mycenae after his noisy work at Troy. He was brilliant and impatient. The Greek state sent Panagiotis Stamatakis to supervise him. Stamatakis was the counterweight, careful, methodical, a recorder of layers, what archaeologists call stratigraphy. In grave circle A, in a shaft we call grave V, 5 gold masks lay over skulls, along with weapons, jewelry, and cups. The layer descriptions in Stamatakis' notes are precise. Ash, pebble floor, depths measured, positions recorded. He drew the masks and noted details like the cut-out ears. That is important. Cut-out ears on the so-called Agamemnon mask are not a flourish from a playful, modern copyist. They match a solution to a practical problem: gold catching on cloth wrappings. He saw adhesive earth impressions around the edges, telling him the mask had been wrapped in textiles that had turned to soil. "And the debates?" she asked. "The reason Vale finds purchase?" "In the 1970s, I said, a few scholars, William Calder, David Trail, looked at Schliemann's habit of embellishing his autobiography and wondered if he might have planted a forged mask to make his discovery more dramatic. The so-called Agamemnon mask is more naturalistic than the others. It has eyebrows that arch like statements, a mustache that knows its own curve. The suspicion hung on style and on Schliemann's character, but radiographs, X-rays that show thickness, tell a different story. The mask's metal is not uniform. It's thicker at the brow, thinner at the cheeks, exactly what you get when a person hammers a sheet over a form with variable pressure. Toolmark studies show chasing patterns consistent with handwork, and Stamatakis' daybooks support the date and the find. Greek authorities do not allow invasive testing. That protects the object's integrity. But we have enough non-invasive data to stand on. The mask is genuine. The name is the myth. "And Sebastian Vale?" she said, and I could hear the curl of her lip in the name. Not unkind exactly, simply tired of being asked to play along with his performances. "A showman," I said. "He prefers to make noise and then profit from the quiet left behind. He may be trying to create the conditions for a theft or a swap, or at least for a controversy that drives his sales and damages your credibility. He will not shout for long if his stage is steady and his props are pulled." "What do you need from me?" "For now," I said, "your steadiness. Keep the real mask sealed with a chain of custody that requires 2 signatures to open. Prepare, if you can, radiograph panels that show the mask's thickness variations and the differences from a documented electrotype copy. Have a conservator verify the scent profile of your object. No modern scented waxes. And be at the Lion Gate at midnight, not as a combatant, but as a witness. I can do that, she said. And the Lion Gate. We have local police notified for general crowd control. It won't be large. Perhaps 20, perhaps 50. He likes cameras. He will get cameras, I said. He will also get a loop. And I will ask the crowd to use their noses and their eyes instead of their appetite for accusation. She chuckled, the first hint of free humor in her voice that evening. Then I will bring my scarf and my calm face, and a journalist I trust. Dr. Papadopoulou, I added, when your team lifted the mask from its burial, in those first days when it was coming up from the earth, did anyone record a scent? There was a pause, longer than the others, and when she spoke, her voice had softened again into memory. We have Stamatakis's daybooks, she said. He noted the textures, the position, the adhesive soil at the edges, the ear cutouts. He did not wax poetic usually, but he did write, indirectly, about the air, warm earth, old cloth. And one of our older field workers, when we reopened the archives decades ago, remembered a story from his grandfather's time about a sweetness, like wax. You think a blend. I think a maker, I said. I think hands warmed wax with a breath, and the gold remembers. We will test it another way later. For now, be ready. Mr. Holmes, she said, thank you. You're welcome, I said. Get some water. Close your eyes between instructions. We will take care of the rest. The screen went dark. My study seemed quieter for a moment, as if it had taken a breath with me and let it out slowly. I set the sliver and the papers on a small square of clean cloth, a stage of their own, and looked at the miniature lion gate as if it might speak. Outside, the rain had gentled to a hush. Midnight would come. Chapter 3, in which the chair becomes a gate of stone. The decision to sleep is a deliberate act in my work, not an escape, a doorway. I took from a drawer a carved pipe whose bowl is smooth from years of touch. I packed the blend I use only for these journeys, a quiet measure of tobacco to carry the spark, a shred of valerian root to invite calm, poppy seeds to soften the edges, and a minute, respectful dusting of nightshade. A whisper, not a shout. It is a key, and keys are not to be abused. I set the sliver of gold, the telegram facsimile, and the folded note on the cloth like 3 beats in a measure. Beside them, I laid a sprig of dried thyme I keep for thinking. I drew the curtains to 3/4 so the rain could still be seen, but felt less like a performance and more like a backdrop. Penelope sighed and shifted on her cushion. She knows the ritual by now. The chair angled a certain way, the lamp trimmed to a lower flame, the book I am not reading placed open and face down, so the room looks like an ordinary room. I lit the pipe. The first drawer tasted of wood and old gardens. Smoke rose and turned in the lamp's warm cone, and where it drifted across the miniature lion gate, it made its own little fog. I breathed slowly, counting down from 7 and back, 7 and back. On the desk, the loop lay cupped in my palm, a coin of focus. There is a moment in the transition when the room forgets its lines, and the play reveals the stagehands. The wood grain of the desk began to look less like wood and more like something else, like the fit of stone blocks ground by centuries of dust. The rain's whisper deepened into hoofbeats, horses moving at a working pace on packed earth. The lamp's glow widened and cooled into daylight, the kind of pale sun that makes old limestone look almost soft. I closed my eyes fully and let the pipe rest in its tray. The smoke curved and uncurled, then became mist, and the mist became air with the scent of thyme that was not from my sprig, but from plants crushed under feet in a different century. When I opened my eyes, I was standing under the Lion Gate at Mycenae in the year 1876. I knew it because the stones were freshly unburied and the ground near the gate had the scraped look of work. Murmurs in Greek and German moved around me like a low tide, and a rope stretched along the edge of a rectangular shaft, grave 5, where men were moving earth out in baskets, passing them hand to hand, not rushed, not slow, in that steady tempo good crews find together. The lion relief above me did not change. Time had nudged everything else, but the lions do not care about our debates. They keep their place over the pillar and watch and bless nothing in particular. A guard dog dozed near a pile of shovels, opening one eye whenever a boot scraped too loudly. The air carried pine resin and something sweet from crushed herbs. Flies drifted, lazy in the pale light. A man with a felt cap and a waxed moustache stood near the rope with a pocket notebook balanced on his palm, pencil worn to a stub. He looked up, measuring me without surprise, the way men on a dig measure everyone, with the question, will you help or hinder the work? In his eyes was a care I recognize across all professions, a responsible man's habit of inventory, wind, light, noise, strangers. Panayotis Stamatakis, the careful counterweight. He turned a page and scribbled a note. Another man, shorter, with a high collar and eager gaze, strode past, boots mud-dulled, hat clutched in his hand. He walked like a sentence that wanted to end with an exclamation point. Heinrich Schliemann glanced at the shaft, at the notebooks, at the sky, and then at me, as if I might be a reference he had not read yet. He nodded once, briskly, and moved on toward a tent where a crate waited for his approval. I placed my palm on the Cyclopean wall's cool stones. They felt the way old promises do, heavy, plain, and not subject to revision without cost. A worker lifted a basket from the trench. It was full of earth and the kinds of small things that become big things when brushed. A bead, a flake of something metallic, a shard that might be pottery and might be luck. The rope along the trench's edge thrummed slightly in the breeze. I drew nearer, careful not to break the line, and waited until Stamatakis looked up again. When he did, I tipped my head in the courteous nod diggers use for strangers who are not there to take credit. "Good morning," I said, softly. "I'm here to watch and to listen." He studied my face for panic or press. Finding neither, he gave a small answering nod and touched his moustache with his thumb and forefinger, flattening a stray hair back into line. "Then watch," he said in Greek, measured and even, "and listen to the ground first. It speaks when words are tired." I smiled the way you do when you recognize a fellow guardian of order. The guard dog sighed and settled its chin on its paws. The day was just beginning to warm. Beyond the gate, the hills of the Argolids stacked themselves like folded linens, and the Thyme hummed beneath our feet, and somewhere in the trench below, a face of gold lay patient under soil that smelled of thyme and cloth and a sweetness that would matter later. The case had arrived. The world had arranged the stage. Midnight would be only another turn of the same clock, and I, calm in the center as always, had already started to count the hammer blows I could not yet hear. Chapter 4. Under the Lion Gate, a handbill and a hammer mark. Morning came to Mycenae warm and clear, a steady golden light laying itself over pale limestone, and the rough giant blocks the ancients set like a wall against time. I stood under the Lion Gate in 1876 with my hands loose at my sides, letting the scent of thyme and crushed pine resin fill my lungs. A guard dog dozed near a pile of shovels, its flank rising and falling with a rhythm that told me the day would unfold, patient and inevitable, Men moved earth with baskets, trading them hand to hand, careful, measured, their talk low. A rope marked the edge of a rectangular shaft, grave 5 of grave circle A, where soil beat softly on wood. When your work requires you to read the world by touch and sound, you slow down. I watched the shadow of a fly cross a plank and heard the tiny click of a pencil at a page. Panagiotis Stamatakis stood apart, focused and precise, his felt cap shading steady eyes, his moustache edged with neat wax. He was turning pages in a pocket notebook, the pencil worn to a nub. He did not speak at first. He did not need to. He measured, he sketched, he kept the day aligned. Then hoofbeats, a courier on horseback, dust and urgency, swung down and pinned a handbill to a post just outside the rope. The paper flapped once and stilled. In English and Greek in bold type, it announced, "At midnight, the mask's forgery unveiled. Sebastian Vale." A visiting reporter, hat tilted back, scratched notes with theatrical attention, as if drama could be summoned by a posture. Workers grumbled. Someone spat into the dust. The dog opened one eye, decided the message was not for him, and slept again. I walked the perimeter of the shaft, letting my half-lidded gaze sweep the trench like a slow lamp. The earth's scent was sweet and damp where it kept last night's cool. The rope's fibers were rough under my fingertips. Down in the cut, a layer of pebbled floor sat firm and compact, and above it, the fill lay in calm bands. The stratigraphy was honest. It held its story without hurry. "Sir," I said softly, the way one speaks to a librarian in a cathedral. Stamatakis looked up. I didn't offer a long introduction. He sized me as a visitor with letters, an antiquarian who understood when not to step, and that was enough for him. He nodded once. I nodded back. He closed his notebook and opened another, larger, a daybook with careful script. He slid it toward me across a plank balanced as a table. The heading, 30 November. He tapped an entry with the tip of his pencil. "Reopening under supervision," he murmured in Greek, his words for me slow and clear, and the exact depth. "Pebble floor, ash layer here." He placed the pencil with care upon a ruled line and then pointed to a sketched outline, a face, oval, with cutouts for ears. "Position," he said, and drew the pencil along the outline. Supine, mask over skull, adhesive earth impressions at edges. So, wrappings. He didn't ornament the phrase. He said it like a weather report. But the detail mattered. The earth held a memory of cloth. That meant the mask lay on the face at the time of burial and had not been pressed there later by careless hands. He turned a page and pointed to a tiny nick sketched on the left ear lobe. "A symmetry," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved the smallest amount, something like a private approval. Not perfect. Human. I lowered my eyes to the paper and let my loupe rest against my palm like a small, patient coin. The sketch was not art. It was a map of decisions. Ears cut out to ease pressure on linen or wool wrappings. Browline surrounded by a field of tiny dimples, his pencil dots marking the rhythm of the hammer, offbeat now and then in a way a machine could not copy, because a machine doesn't get tired and then correct with a breath. I could see it in my mind. A sheet of soft gold hammered over a carved wooden form. The gold coaxed into brow and cheek, the air above it calm and warm. At the edge of the work area, a man with a camera adjusted his tripod and complained under his breath about the light. Another worker shifted a basket and muttered, "Gold is trouble," and someone answered, "Trouble is louder when it's thin." "Forgive me," I said to Stamatakis, my voice low, but I saw the handbill. I kept my tone calm and even, as I always do when a clock appears. Midnight is a stage Mr. Vale understands. Stamatakis's gaze did not change. He tapped the notebook again, the way a captain taps a compass. "I keep what happens," he said. "The rest is noise." I lifted my eyes to the trench where the rope made a neat rectangle in air. "May I ask about the mask's brow?" He took back the daybook and traced the sketched brow with the pencil. "Hammer here," he said. "Then chase. Repousse, hammering from the back to raise the form, and chasing, working the front to sharpen lines." He glanced at me to make sure I had the terms. I nodded. "You can follow the blows if you let the light move slowly," he said, "and if your hand knows what tired looks like." He looked toward the handbill and then away. "There will be replicas," he said, half to himself. "They always come." He flipped to a later date and showed me a note about copyists. "But a replica's sameness is unlike a living irregularity. The old thing breathes with flaws." I crouched at the edge of the trench and let my attention sink to the brow line as if it were a horizon. In my mind, a field of tiny hammer marks rose and fell with a rhythm that changed like a heartbeat when the hand that held the hammer adjusted. Off to the left eyebrow, at about the angle of the hour hand at 11 o'clock on a clock face, the dimples ran slightly diagonal. These were not uniform ripples. They were the trails of a tool in a human hand. Another courier rode up, and this one delivered a tube to a reporter. The reporter unrolled a lithograph with teasing words about secret inscriptions in ancient gold revealed by modern lamps. He smoothed the paper, looked toward the trench, and smiled as if he could already hear applause. I read the line from where I stood. He was baiting a crowd with a promise. He did not know he was also bait for me. The deadline had entered the site. It took the shape of a handbill and the sound of the words, "Midnight Reveal." But it was the same old thing, pressure against truth. Panic is a poor tool for a detective. I took a breath and returned my gaze to the notebook, to the place where proof sits quietly and never gets bored. Marks, layers, and the memory of a hand. "Thank you," I said to Stamatakis. He nodded. He had given me clue 1, position, ear cutouts, the asymmetrical nick, and the pattern of blows. I filed it where I keep the surest things, in the back of my mind, where the noise can't reach. Chapter 5. A notebook, a tool roll, and the scent of beeswax. In a lull after the baskets slowed and the sun climbed to a kind angle, I introduced myself properly to Stamatakis, not with a speech, but with the small proofs of respect a field man recognizes. I asked permission before stepping closer. I handed him a clean cloth to rest his daybook on a plank. I remarked on the way he noted the ash layer as separate from the pebbled floor, an understanding of sequence, not just contents. He gave me a glance that said, "You notice," and I did not waste it. "A quiet visitor," he said, and the corner of his moustache lifted. "Good, we have enough noise." "Your notes," I said, "will be the anchor when the wind turns." He gestured to a small chest near a tent post, then helped me tie them to the mast. Inside lay a roll of leather, soft and scuffed. He unfolded it, and a set of tools winked in the light. Simple, honest pieces. A bronze burnisher with a rounded end, its surface darkened with use. A wooden chasing stick with a tip softened smooth. A tiny hammer, almost a toy, but deadly serious. He lifted the burnisher and turned it under his nose. "Smell," he said. I leaned in. There it was, faint but distinct. Beeswax, warm and clean, with a ghost of something green and sharp. Thyme. It threaded through the wax scent like a note in a chord. I let the smell settle in my head. Scents are keys. They open doors to memory. "Found in the fill," he said, "not as part of the burial, later intrusion or caretaker kit, but the wax. It's familiar." He held up the burnisher so the light slid along its curve. I think of hands working a soft metal that wants to split if you rush it. Wax can calm a surface. It lets a tool glide. He set the burnisher down and picked up the wooden chasing stick. If someone made a mask by hand, they would tap like this. Listen. He tapped the plank in a rhythm. Tap, tap, glide, then paused. A different sound than a modern copy made by electricity. Electrotypes, he said, looking at me to see if the word made sense for me in this context. I nodded. They coat a mold with metal by current. The surface comes out uniform, with subtle ripples from the bath, and edges sometimes bear a shadow where a wire helped conduct. You can smell oil or modern wax sometimes, but not always the ghost of an herb that had time to live in metal. The way he said it told me he valued what a human hand does that a machine cannot. He did not disparage the machine. He simply knew what it was not. "You wrote," I said, pointing to his daybook, "that this mask was a face at rest who remembered smiling." He smiled, an expression small and real. I did. It was a private note. The others were flatter, more like shields for a face. This one had lid folds that made you think perhaps he could open his eyes later and tell you a joke he knew. He made a short, soft sound at the memory. "It is a dangerous thought to have at a grave," he added, "but the craft called it into my head." He turned the tool roll and revealed a strip of leather cut unevenly, stained dark at one edge. He tugged it free and held it up. From the same lot we found the burnisher in, a strap used to bind a small basket, maybe a later visitor. But here, he sniffed near a darker patch and blinked. Wax again, thyme again. The scent is faint, but it lingers in places the sun did not reach. "Replicas," I said, keeping my voice level. "Do you expect many?" "Always," he replied. "Tourists' pockets want history when they go home. Skilled men will make honest copies, and less skilled men will make lies. The honest ones will admit or leave marks to show the truth. The lies will try to smooth everything until nothing is left to catch on." He gestured toward the trench. "This," he nodded at the earth, the layers, the daybook. "Catches. It snags a liar's sleeve." We stood quietly for a moment, letting the work's sounds collect and settle. A cicada rasped from the wall. The dog turned in its sleep. Far off, a mule brayed as if surprised by its own voice. I took out my loupe, and with permission, I studied the burnisher's tip. It had faint lines, not grooves, more like the soft striations you get when wax cools and holds a memory of direction. If that tool had touched the cheeks of a gold mask, it would leave a signature only another hand would recognize. He took the burnisher back and rolled the leather carefully. "Your letters of introduction say you are a man who reads tools. Then read this for me." "The burnisher is ancient work," I said, "or kept with love for a long time. The wax remembers time. The wooden chasing stick was gripped by a hand that favored the right, but sometimes turned the tool with the left for tight spaces. The hammer's face is slightly oval, worn more on one side from years of small corrections at the end of a stroke." He blinked once, approval quiet and pleased. "I remember a day," he said, "when I lifted that mask. The earth clung to the edges as if it did not want to let the face go. My hand smelled of soil and the oldest sweetness." He looked past me, beyond the rope, toward the lion gate, as if seeing a path through stone. "It is not the name Agamemnon that matters. It is the handwork and the mourning. They tell us the man had weight." The mention of name led my mind back to the handbill, to the words "forgery unveiled," to Vale's habit of bringing a crowd to the edge of a cliff and then insisting they jump with him. "Mr. Vale," I said, "has a plan to show a fragment and call it proof." I kept my tone mild. "He will put on a lamp and wave papers." Stamatakis's mouth did not change. "Then we will wave the tool marks," he said, "and the layers." He tapped the daybook again, "and the nick on the ear, and the way the blows drift and return. like a man thinking aloud. He slid the tool roll back into the chest and closed the lid with a soft click. Gravity had put the handbill up. Craft would take it down. He had given me clue 2, beeswax with thyme, a burnisher's glide, and the certainty that irregularity was not a flaw, but a fingerprint. I pocketed the scent like a key. Chapter 6. Noon glare, a pamphlet, and a door that leads backward. By noon the sight hummed. The glare off stone pressed at the eyes and made shade feel like a cool hand on a warm forehead. A man in a high collar with eager eyes, Heinrich Schliemann himself, stepped down into the trench, boots dulled with mud, and waved a hand at a feature he wanted his foreman to see. He moved like a person already imagining the sentence he would write about what he would find tomorrow. He glanced at me the way a man notices a new book on a table he didn't expect, and nodded briskly. "Truth will outlive us," he said, like a toast, and went on. Near the tents, a travelling showman had set up a small crate on its side as a platform. He handed out pamphlets with a flourish. "Secret inscriptions," the paper declared, "visible only to modern light." He tapped a little lantern with a violet glow and told the crowd it could see what priests hid and kings feared. I took one pamphlet and ran my thumb over the cheap ink. It smeared a little. The promises did not. The claim was a shape I knew, a modern light to reveal an old truth. But not all lights are honest. Some are coloured for theatre. I read the lines and heard the echo of a different voice. Sebastian Vale's smooth cadence announcing a midnight reveal. I saw him lifting a gold sliver between 2 fingers, smile calibrated for cameras, and saying it fell from the mask during a private viewing abroad. An event that did not happen, but a line good enough for headlines. He would shine a lamp and call the ghost of letters by a name that did not belong here. Linear B, the script of later Mycenaean administration, alive centuries after the burial we stood over. He would count on the crowd not knowing dates and not caring about them at midnight. I tucked the pamphlet away and stepped from the tense shade into full light. The sight wavered, the way reality sometimes does when heat turns air into a lens, and then the dream folded like a cloth. The Lion Gate's blocks softened to timber and plaster. The half-familiar walls straightened into the crisp lines of the past, not as ruin, but as home. I stood in the citadel of Mycenae around 1550 BC. A hammer beat a heartbeat somewhere beyond an open doorway. The sound drew me. I followed it down a corridor that smelled of charcoal and sweet fat. The hammer stopped and then started again, slower. I came to a low room open to a small court where light fell clean and gold dust floated like tiny petals in the air. A man stood at a bench, lean, forearms dusted with leaf, short curled hair bound with a thong. His linen kilt was streaked with work. His fingertips shone with beeswax. Chrysion, though he hadn't said his name yet. He held a thin, oval sheet against a carved wooden face form. He balanced the hammer in his right hand and a chasing tool in his left and tested a line at the brow. He heard me before he saw me. He turned, wary, eyes sharp like a craftsman's when someone enters his space unannounced. He moved his body slightly, a small step that put his work between me and anyone standing beyond me. A man who had had to protect his bench before. "I will not break your work," I said in his language, slow and respectful, my hands open and empty at my sides. He looked me up and down and marked me as an oddity, but not yet a threat. He glanced toward the doorway. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, the heavy tread of a guard or a steward. He set the oval down on the bench and placed the hammer atop it, making the sheet sing a tiny sound. He said nothing until the footsteps passed and faded. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "A watcher," I said. "A reader of marks. A friend to hands like yours. I nodded toward the oval. You cut the ears, I said, so the cloth won't bite when it wraps. His eyes narrowed, then softened. You have seen such work. I have seen the ear cutouts sketched by a man with a waxed moustache who watches graves, I said. I have seen the nick on the left lobe. I have seen dimples in the brow where a hand paused and then corrected. He stepped a little closer and studied my face the way a goldsmith studies metal, looking for where it will bend and where it won't. You spoke of a man with a moustache, he said. I do not know that man. I know men who carry spears. I know men who carry baskets. I know women who carry oil. I know priests who carry names. I carry a hammer. He picked it up and turned it in his hand. And I carry wax. He lifted a small pot and held it under my nose. The scent rose clean and sharp. Beeswax, warmed by hand heat with thyme crushed into it. For glide, he said, for kindness to the metal. It likes to be persuaded, not bullied. The wax holds the line soft where I want soft, and then I chase the line hard where I want the eye to rest. He tapped the brow of the wooden form. Here, the man is a leader, he said, or his people want him to look like one. So I make the brow firm. The cheeks I soften because he is also a son. He will be covered with cloth. The ears. He tapped the wooden ear. I cut open so the wrappings do not pull and tear when they dry. Someone will stand over him, I said, and their hands will smell like earth and the oldest sweetness. He looked at me with surprise and then a small smile, the length of a breath. Yes, he said simply. He picked up the chasing tool and the hammer and tapped a line along the brow. Tap, glide, tap. The sound folded out into the room and smoothed my thoughts the way a calm sea smooths a boat's motion. Why is your face in my door? He asked after a while, still working. There is a man in my time who will hold up a sliver of gold and call you a liar, I said. And if he wins, the door to your work will close for people who are not born yet. They will think the mask was a trick, and they will stop asking who the man under it was. He snorted softly, the kind of sound a craftsman makes when someone who has never hammered gold speaks about gold loudly. If he does not know what a tool mark is, he can eat his words, he said, not as cruelty, but as a firm observation. He handed me the oval. You can feel where the hammer was tired if you close your eyes. I did. I closed my eyes and let my thumb sweep across the brow. The gold was thin, a single sheet, the weight in my hand a whisper. Under my thumb, the brow carried tiny fields where the hammer dimples aligned and then drifted and then aligned again. No machine rhythm, no bathroom tile neatness. A person. I handed it back. Guards are suspicious of strangers, he said quietly. They will ask you for your name and who sent you. You smell like neither the kiln nor the court. I know both. I'll keep to the doorway, I said, and I did, sitting where I could see both the bench and the corridor. The trotting of a messenger tossed words against the wall like pebbles thrown by a child. The words were about grain and oil and a ship with a broken plank. Life here went on around the work, as it always does. The pressure of midday and the handbill with its promise of a show did not reach into this room. It could not. The hammer's patient logic kept it out, but I held the deadline in one hand and the oval in the other in my mind. Vale would push the clock forward if he could, and he would do it with flair and glare. I would meet him with a calm hour and a loop. Your name, I said to the goldsmith. I will keep it if you give it. Chrysion, he said. He placed the oval back on the wooden form and drew his breath in and out slowly. You smell like smoke from a different kind of lamp, he added, not unkindly. But your hands are quiet, and you listen to metal. Sit, watch. If you bring no spear, You are welcome. I sat, I watched. I kept the scent of beeswax and thyme in a place in my head where I keep ropes that need to be pulled later. The room held me safely, and the work kept the world's rush from breaking in. Outside, time moved. Inside, we held it still. Chapter 7. The Brow, the Burnish, and the Story So Far. The longer I watched Chrysion work, the more my thoughts fell into his rhythm. Tap for form. Glide for kindness, tap for definition. He heated the wax in his palm and ran it along the cheek of the gold, and it shone not with mirror glare, but with a soft light, like sunrise on skin. He shifted the chasing tool and angled it so thin light ran along the edge, and then he pressed at a diagonal, more pressure under the left brow than the right, correcting and correcting until the line felt right under his eye. I asked if I could sit at the doorway where the breeze found me, and he shrugged permission. I rested the loop in my palm and let it feel like a talisman again. The room smelled of charcoal, warm metal, resin from the brazier, and that gentle herb note, thyme laying its hand in the wax. There was also the dry smell of stone warmed by sun, and the faint animal note of leather apron and sandals. The senses anchor deduction when your mind wants to race ahead. "Let me speak my thought," I said, as much to myself as to him. He did not object. "Clue 1, I murmured, watching the line of his tool. In 1876, Stamatakis's daybook asserts position, stratigraphy, and specifics. The mask lay over a skull in shaft grave, 5, with earth impressions of wrappings along the edges. The ears had cutouts. The left earlobe had an asymmetrical nick. Around the brow were tiny hammer dimples, irregular and human. I let the picture form again behind my eyes, the daybook's lines steady as the rope around the trench. "Clue 2, I said, "the tool roll and its scent. A bronze burnisher stained with wax, a wooden chasing stick worn soft, the smell of beeswax and thyme in an object recovered near the fill. Not burial goods, but a later kit or a caretaker's set. Yet the scent matches what your hand uses. The wax and thyme blend keeps gold supple, reduces cracking, and leaves a ghost scent that can live in pores for a long time." Chrysion looked at me from the side, amused at my way of talking to air. He tapped the brow again, mindful of the corner, and let the hammer sit. "Now the threat," I went on. "Sebastian Vale will stage a reveal. He will use a modern light, a UV torch, to pretend at seeing an inscription no ancient craftsman put there. He will produce a gold sliver and say it came from the mask. But the sliver is from a replica made by electrotyping in the early 1900s. A process where a mold is coated with conductive material and metal is deposited by electric current to form a shell. Electrotypes often carry a uniform micro-ripple texture across broad areas, like subtle, parallel waves, and their edges can show the ghost of a wire seam where a wire was used to carry current around an edge. I looked at Chrysion and translated simply. It's a way of growing metal skin in a bath, not hammering it into shape. It makes everything the same, too same. He snorted again softly, and I smiled. "Early replica workshops in Athens," I continued under my breath, "like that of Émile Gilliaron around 1906, made excellent copies for study and display. They are historical in their own right, but their textures are different. Their thickness is uniform because the current deposits evenly. An ancient mask made by hand has thickness that varies. The brow can be thicker where the gold was pushed more. The cheeks can be thinner because the metal thinned as it stretched. Radiographs, X-rays, have shown this in the original mask at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. Panel studies show the brow with slightly more mass, the cheeks swell with less. These patterns do not appear in electrotypes. To him who will show letters, I said, I will say this. Linear B script appears in the later Palace period, about 2 centuries after this burial. The mask is from around 1600 to 1500 BC. Linear B is used from around 1450 BC onward. Even then it is scratched on clay tablets and seals, not hidden under gold eyelids. So the script he will show is not only a fake, it is anachronistic. I let the word sit. It means out of time. I always explain it for a sleepy ear. Chrysion adjusted the oval and took up his burnisher. He moved it across the cheek with a motion like a slow wave. In raking light, I could see faint diagonal microstriations, tiny lines at the angle of 11 o'clock radiating from his strokes. I knew then that in modern photos of the mask, curators had found similar tiny diagonal lines under the left brow. I had seen them with my loupe in memory. The tool signature was a bridge across centuries, a choreographed accident no electricity could dance. I made the chain explicit because clear chains are soothing. Because the daybook places the mask securely in the grave at a specific depth with wrappings impressions, a plant is unlikely. Because the ear cutouts and the asymmetric nick are drawn in the moment, not invented later, the irregularities are true. Because Chrysion's method produces diagonal microstriations around the left brow and varying thickness across the sheet, and because museum radiographs match this pattern, the original is consistent with hand-hammered ancient work. Therefore, the sliver that Veil will show, with its uniform micro-ripples and seam shadow, belongs to an electrotype copy made centuries later. Therefore, his claim that it fell from the mask is a lie. I paused and looked at the oval under Chrysion's hands. The outline of the eyebrow had become a soft ridge with a crisp line along its front, like a controlled wave breaking. The lids were ambiguous, half in the world, half in a dream. "Your lid," I said to him. "It makes a listener ask a question. Are the eyes open? Are they closed?" "That is the game," he said. "The man is gone, and we put a doorway where his eyes were. People can stand at it and think. The priests say it helps the journey. I do not know. I only know it looks right to me." I leaned back against the stone and spoke the case aloud for anyone sleepy enough to be soothed by a list. "We have a mask found in 1876 in Shaft Grave 5 at Mycenae under the Lion Gate, part of Grave Circle A, predating Homer's Agamemnon by centuries. We have authenticity challenged before in the 1970s by William M. Calder III and David A. Trail because of Schliemann's taste for drama and his lies elsewhere. But the balance of evidence, tool marks, radiographs, the oversight of Stamatakis supports authenticity. We have a present-day antagonist, Sebastian Veil, a publisher who feeds on scandal, planning a midnight performance to call the mask a forgery, using a replica fragment and an invented UV inscription. The stakes are the honor of the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, the security of the exhibition, and something quieter, the dignity of a specific man's burial. The deadline is midnight. I let silence fill the room and then let it empty again. "So," I said, "we have our logic. We need our plan." Chrysion set his tool down and looked at me. He took up the small pot of wax and added a drop of something from a reed tube, crushed it between finger and thumb, and worked it into the blend. The aroma lifted and widened. Thyme oil, yes, but also resin and a trace of smoke. He rubbed it along the oval gently. "Now," he said, "it will glide without tearing when I press for the eyelids. That scent," I said softly, "will outlive you." "Good," he said. "Let honest noses find it. It would be a quiet signature I could use, not by smearing it on an artifact, never that, but by recognizing the difference between an old embedded scent and a fresh resinous conservation wax used on a modern replica. The plan was forming, and it needed to live both here and in the waking world. I closed my eyes for a breath and let the hammer's rhythm set the outline for what would come next. Chapter 8. A recipe, a memory, and a trap set. Kindly. May I take a token? I asked Chrysion. Not a piece of your work, something smaller, a thing to remind a later mind what to smell. He shook his head, not in refusal, but in care. What I make stays here, he said. Then he lifted the small pot of wax with thyme and held it in his palm as if warming a bird. But I will give you what cannot be stolen. He leaned close, as if teaching a child to tie a knot. For finishing, I blend beeswax softened by hand heat with a little oil from thyme and sometimes a strand of resin from the pines. The ratio changes with the day's heat. My hand knows it. If you ever smell a sharp resin more than the thyme, you are smelling a later touch, not mine. The old blend buries itself in pores over time. It becomes part of the metal's skin. Knowledge. It was better than a token. It would float forward and anchor facts in the present. The dream shifted, a gentle turning, like a boat aligning with current. I found myself back under the 1876 sun, where men hauled up baskets, and the dogs sighed as if pleased with the day's progress. The handbill at the post fluttered again as a draft played through the gap in the stones. I sought Stamatakis, who was tying his notebook with a cord. One more question, I said. When you lifted the mask, what did you smell? He paused, eyes moving as a memory returned. Warm earth, old cloth. He half smiled at the air. And something sweet. He pursed his lips. Wax, he said at last, and a herb note. Thyme. I remember because my mother rubbed thyme into lamb when it was a feast day, and I was young then. He shook his head once at himself, surprised by the way scent brought a table back to a trench. Yes, wax and thyme. It was enough to carry from the dream into the waking world where the exhibition waited and the press would gather. When I take a plan from here to there, I do it the way I handle a delicate shard, supported on 3 points, never pinched. I set those 3 points now. Point 1. I pictured Dr. Eleni Papadopoulou at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. Ink-stained fingers, indigo scarf. In the quiet of my study, my phone sat where I had left it before I entered this dream. I spoke, trusting the line we left open between us. Eleni, listen, I said in a low voice anyone half asleep could catch. Do not handle the mask. Keep it sealed with 2-person chain of custody until the cases are locked. But put a tiny trace, not on the artifact, never on it, on a discreet felt tab beneath the wooden mount in the display, a blend of museum-grade beeswax with a drop of thyme oil. It is a teaching scent for tonight. It tells me our noses work. It will keep us honest and alert without touching the gold. I could picture her nodding, skeptical but open. She knows I never ask for interventions on artifacts. I ask for reminders beside them. Point 2. Prepare radiograph panels A and B, I said into the quiet, my voice a metronome. Panel A. The original mask's radiographs that show uneven thickness, the brow slightly thicker where the metal was pushed more, the cheek swell slightly thinner. Mark the diagonal tool signatures under the left brow at about the 11 o'clock angle. Panel B. A radiograph of a 1906 electrotype replica, a known Gilliaron copy. Highlight the uniform thickness and the faint seam shadow near the edge where a reinforcing wire sat. Mount them side by side near the conservation desk at the press briefing area, ready to roll to any room. Title the board, How Hands Show Themselves in Metal. She would smile at that. She loves a clear caption. Point 3. Arrange quiet security, I said. 2 layers. One at the Lion Gate at Mycenae where Vale will perform. Work with local authorities, keep the presence calm, not aggressive. And another at the museum loading bay, an easy place for a swap if the spectacle draws eyes away. Use plain clothes, body cameras on. Catalogue any fragment displayed at the gate if seized, bag it and hold it for analysis. In the dream, the argolid breeze moved the grass like fingertips. I let a long breath out and felt my shoulders settle. The plan was not a trap to humiliate. It was a frame to show contrast. I would not let a man be insulted in his craft, but I would let the facts do the talking in a voice the crowd could hear. Near the tent, the showman with pamphlets argued with a worker about the proper angle of his lantern. I walked past them toward the lion gate. As I stepped under the carved lions, I felt the weight of the lintel above, stone laid to last. It watched men argue and men reconcile and men carry their dead. It had seen more midnights than any of us would. I sat on a low stone at the edge of the circle and looked at the stelae marking the graves. Each stele held a carved image, a chariot, a figure, a pattern. Stories simplified for stone. A journalist took notes in English about mask with mustache and pointed beard and eyes may be open. A boy idled with a stick, drawing lines in dust with the patience of a lizard in sun. I closed my eyes for a few breaths and listened. Hammer from another century, the flap of a handbill in today's wind, a mule complaining about something that would never change, and somewhere, faintly, the whisper of nocturnal insects turning themselves on as the light lowered. When I opened my eyes, late afternoon had arrived and the heat had eased. A runner came up from the lower path with a message in his hand. "He sends a carriage from Argos," the foreman said of Schliemann, gesturing toward town. "We have visitors at dusk." My mouth made no comment. Visitors are a tide. You don't stop a tide. You build a wall and watch it rise and fall without losing your footing. I walked the path that leads outward from the gate and found a quiet place where the thyme grew thick. I knelt and pressed my palm lightly over a sprig, then brought my fingers to my nose. The scent rose clean, simple, and low. The wax from Chrysion's room was a chord. This was a single note. It sharpened my intention. People think a plan is a set of moves, and it is, but it's also a set of senses you commit to. Look for uneven thickness. Look for diagonal tool lines. Smell for aged wax time as distinct from modern resinous blends. Listen for the words that push panic and set them aside like pebbles. By the time the sun started its long slide, I had walked the perimeter twice and kept my mind slow. I do not hurry toward confrontation. I arrive, nothing more. At the crest of the hill that looked back toward the gate, I paused. The air seemed to hold its breath. Distant voices carried the name of a man with a lion pin on his lapel. Sebastian Vale was not yet here, but his shadow had arrived. Men set torches in brackets and tested their flames. The reporter checked his stack of papers and smoothed them with the flat of his hand. I touched the loop in my pocket like a friend. The night would bring the performance. The plan was in place. The scent waited in air and in memory. The radiographs would be ready. The security would be kind and steady. Panic would be asked to take a seat outside the ropes. The first torch flared. Somewhere, a nightjar started its raspy call. I took a breath and let it out slowly. I was ready to walk into the circle with a calm voice and a pocket lens and let the handwork speak louder than any handbill. I looked up at the lions on the gate and gave them a small nod as to old colleagues. Then I turned toward the gathering crowd and the clock moved into its last hour before midnight. Chapter 9, in which a seam, a scent, and a story undo a spectacle. The night settled over Mycenae like a heavy cloak, and the lion gate held its breath. Torches lined the path, their flames leaning in the light breeze that moved down from the hills. The Cyclopean stones, those great patient blocks, carried the heat of the day and traded it for the soft chill of midnight. Cicadas thinned their song, as if they knew a quieter sound wanted the air. I stood just inside the carved lion's gaze. Behind me, the slope fell away to darkness. Before me, a small crowd held their places with the expectant hush reserved for miracles and scandals. I saw Dr. Eleni Papadopoulou in the second rank, her indigo scarf a calm signature amid shadow. At the edge, a neutral journalist, sharp pencil, calm face, watched with a skeptic's respect. Security melted into the night, present without posture. They did not glare, they waited. That is a powerful thing, to wait. Sebastian Vale stepped forward. His jacket fit him like a plan. The lion head pin on his lapel found every torch and flashed. His voice carried the practiced rise and fall of a man who had rehearsed the line where wonder meets alarm. "Friends of history," he began, "tonight the Lion Gate watches a truth it cannot ignore. The so-called Mask of Agamemnon hides a modern hand. The proof is here." He held up a UV torch in one hand and a small case in the other. He lifted out a gold sliver, wafer thin, and pinched it delicately, using tweezers so clean they caught their own star. He shone the UV light on a blown-up photograph pinned to a board. Grainy, high contrast, dramatic. "An inscription," he said. "Microscopic, the mark of a later craftsman." He let the words hang, because silence can make weak claims look stronger if you let it stretch. I stepped forward with my unhurried gait. "May I?" I asked. The question was for him, but the crowd was the audience. Their shoulders tensed, then eased when I spoke. Calm changes the shape of a night. "Mr. Vale," I said, "I am Snorelock Holmes, and I propose we keep the burden of proof light enough to hold in one hand." The corners of his mouth faltered at my name, then tried for a fresh angle of confidence. He offered the gold sliver with theatrical reluctance. I accepted it with quiet care. The piece weighed very little, a thin leaf that caught the torchlight and gave it back in a buttery tone. I brought out my loop. I have used this loop in many storms, and never once has it raised its voice. I lifted it to my eye, and the world narrowed to a small world that contained everything. "Listen with your eyes," I said to the circle, "because the surface tells the story." I rotated the sliver, making the light walk across it. "Here," I pointed with a finger as steady as the stone around us. "You can see uniform micro-ripple patterns. They look like the grain of water when a breeze is exactly even. These are typical of electroforming, electrotype replicas produced in the early 1900s. They are not the irregular dimples of a hand hammer. They are a machine's even hum." I traced to the edge, and here is a faint groove, a shadow of a seam where a reinforcing wire once sat inside a mold. Early replica makers used wire to strengthen edges before plating. Ancient Mycenaean goldworkers cut and finished by hand, with shears that left small, irregular bites, not a wire-straight legacy. I lowered the sliver a breath. Because we have a seam shadow, we must have had a mold. Because we have uniform ripples, we must have had electricity. Therefore, this fragment is not ancient. Sebastian Vale kept his smile, but it turned into an exercise rather than a feeling. "You mistake science for theatre," he said. "Electroforming shows what lies beneath, the true inscription." He gestured to the photograph. "Let us be fair," I said. "Let us test with more than eyes. Scent carries a century in a single breath." I nodded to Eleni, who stepped forward with a small vial and the quiet confidence that comes from work done precisely. "Beeswax," I explained to the crowd. The ancients used beeswax mixed with thyme oil to keep gold supple during finishing. It leaves a signature, soft, herbal, and woven into the pores of the metal. Early 20th century replicas, on the other hand, often carry conservation waxes and resins with a sharper, pine-like note. I lifted the sliver to my nose. I breathed slow. "Clean wax with a glossy resin overtone," I said. "Not the old warmth of beeswax married to herb and earth." I offered it to Eleni. She breathed. Then the journalist. Small nods. No drama. Just agreement at the scale of a human breath. "Now," I continued, "about your inscription. You say it is Linear B." I kept my voice soft. Linear B is the Bronze Age, writing used by Mycenaean palace scribes, but it appears several centuries after the date of the shaft graves in Grave Circle A. The so-called Mask of Agamemnon dates to about 1550 BC. Linear B tablets at Pylos and Knossos belong to a later system that thrives closer to 1300 to 1200 BC, but that's not the point that matters here. I raised the photograph. These marks are not even accurate Linear B. They are miscopied signs, mixing strokes into nonsense. Because the script is anachronistic, and because the letter forms are wrong, the inscription fails at 2 levels. I set the photograph aside and brought out 2 large stiff prints Eleni had tucked into a folio. Radiograph panel A and radiograph panel B. The security man nearest us set a small stand without fanfare, and I clipped the panels side by side. The torchlight glowed through the backlit frames. "This," I said, tapping the left image, "is the authentic mask's radiograph. See how thickness varies. The brow is slightly heavier because a craftsman put more pressure there while chasing the arch. The cheeks thin with the gentle glide of a burnisher. The ear cutouts show tiny hand-cut irregularities, and there's an asymmetric nick on the left lobe that aligns with Stamatakis's daybooks sketch from 1876. Now this," I tapped the right image, "is a 1906 electrotype replica by Emile Gilleron's workshop. Notice the uniform thickness, a machine's even coat, and at the edge, a faint line, your seam shadow again. Because the left image is irregular and human, and because the right image is uniform and industrial, the original is handmade and the fragment is modern. Therefore, your fragment could not have fallen from the ancient mask. The logic rests on observable facts, not on a performance." The crowd breathed together, not entirely as one, but close. The journalist scribbled a few words, then looked up with the kind of expression that carries both relief and a good headline. Eleni's shoulders lowered a fraction, and her scarf caught a small wind. Sebastian Vale tried once more to stand his ground. "A plant," he said. "Could you not have planted this radiograph? Anyone can print a panel." I nodded, a slow concession to the possibility without conceding the truth. "That is why chain of custody exists," I said. Tonight, 2 keys opened the authentic case. 2 signatures accompany every moment the mask leaves its sealed chamber, and you yourself posted your proof before midnight. Timing matters. The mask never met your hand. He aimed for the crowd's sympathy with a shrug that suggested he was being silenced by suits and windowless rooms. But the night had heard enough spectacle. Facts, repeated softly, were louder. I returned the gold sliver to its cushioned nest. "Mr. Vale," I said, in a voice gentle enough to belong to the stones, "sensationalism feeds a quick appetite. History is a longer meal. You can help people see, or you can make them doubt what they already know. One path is a service. The other is a theft." I nodded to security, whose presence remained so modest that it was almost a courtesy. "My colleagues would like to ask you how a century-old replica fragment arrived in your case." He pressed his lips into a line and handed the case to a plainclothes officer. The officer said nothing, which was the right choice. Questions could wait for a room where torches were not needed. I turned to the crowd. "With your permission," I said softly, "let me give you a better story to carry home. In 1876, under this very gate, men uncovered a circle of graves. Grave Circle A held warriors, rulers, people loved and feared. Among their gifts were 5 gold masks. The one you know by a borrowed name is older than Homer's song. It is the handiwork of a human being whose craft needed no legend to justify it. I let the torches do their small work of warmth. Tomorrow, the museum will show you tool marks and photographs. Tonight, let us let the stone keep the quiet." Eleni stepped forward, her voice like a soft ribbon wrapping the gathering. "We open at 10, she said. "Panel A and Panel B will be there, along with the mask and its companions. We will answer questions about people and craft, about grief and gold. Thank you for guarding this night with your presence." The crowd did something rare for a crowd. They respected the end of a moment. No applause, only nods and the soft sound of shoes finding paths under stars. People drifted away. The lions above the gate watched with their long patience. Eleni and I stood there a moment more. "You set a gentle trap," she said, "and he walked into it, carrying his own claims. People will sometimes help you if you let them keep their dignity," I said. "Tonight, he will have time to think about better uses for late hours." I closed my loop and tucked it away. The night settled more deeply. The torches were pinched out one by one, and darkness returned the hill to itself. Chapter 10, in which the face rests and the world exhales. Morning in Athens arrives with a blue that belongs to clean stone and quiet minds. The museum's glass doors took the light and softened it into a welcoming glow. Inside, the exhibition moved like a calm river. Cases in clear lines, panels in simple words, arrows that asked nothing but your patience. I stood by a display that set the scene, a map of the Argolid, with a small gilded dot for Mycenae, a photograph of the Lion Gate, a reproduction of Stamatakis' daybook page with that fine, careful sketch, the ear cutouts, the nick on the left lobe, the coordinate notes that turn earth into story. People read without rush. They leaned in with their shoulders, then leaned back with their understanding. At the heart of the room, the mask rested on a discreet mount, gold as stored sunlight. Its arched eyebrows kept their private thought. The eyelids, ambiguous as ever, met each visitor halfway, half dreaming, half awake. A child stood there longer than most. He tilted his head. He blinked slowly, aligning his gaze with the mask's. "Are his eyes open?" he asked no one in particular. "They are open to his people and closed to time," replied an older woman beside him. It was not an answer from a catalogue. It was enough. Eleni circulated with a curator's rhythm, stepping in only when needed. Someone asked about style, the pointed beard and mustache, the natural feel. She pointed silently to Panel A and Panel B nearby. They told the story at a level eyes could keep. The radiograph of the authentic showed thickness like a topographic map made by hand and breath. The replica's radiograph was a lesson in uniformity. Even the simplest visitor could sense the difference, and sensing is better than being told. She caught my eye across the room with a small smile that carried the whole distance. Then, because a museum never ceases being a workshop, she slipped away to check a seal, consult a guard, reassure a thoughtful guest who needed time more than facts. I found a bench by a side gallery where the rhythm of footsteps eased into a calm pattern. A lion head rhyton, close cousin to the one from the grave, looked as if it had just drunk from a stream. I listened to the murmur of voices like water over stone. The air held a faint scent of clean casework and linen gloves. There is a special quiet inside a museum in the first hour. anticipation relieved by truth. My pocket buzzed, soft as a fly on a pane. It was a message from Eleni. Fragment tested, replica scrap, early electrotype, resin-rich conservation wax, probable Gilieron lineage, case closed on that front, security following, leads. There was a second line. A small vial awaits you at your desk, a gift from Chrysion's shadow, beeswax with a breath of thyme, for teaching and for you. I smiled. The past had sent a note, and the present had translated it carefully. A child laughed near the exit. A guard with a kind face helped a visitor read a label. The exhibition breathed. No headlines shouted. The story walked on its own feet. Because the plan placed truth where rumor wanted to stand, the exhibition opened. Because the seams and scents spoke at human scale, the room trusted the mask again. Therefore, the figure behind the gold, whoever he was, kept his dignity. I let my eyes soften until the mask's brow turned from line into curve, and the curve into a warm blur. The gallery's hum carried me to the edge of a familiar tide, the one that runs between worlds. I did not fight it. A detective's best tools are patience and sleep. The museum became the sea. The sea became a low rain. And then I was in my chair, back in my study. The lamplight pooled in the exact way I had left it. Penelope, my old beagle, raised her head from her cushion and made the small, satisfied sigh of a creature that finds you where it expects you to be. I scratched her ear. She settled. On the desk lay the Parcel's gold fragment, returned to its place in the world as a replica. Beside it, a small vial, beeswax, touched with thyme. I unstoppered it. The scent rose, soft and herbal, the noontime of a craftsperson's bench folded into a bottle. It did not demand attention, it invited it. I set the vial near my loop and arranged the radiograph prints I had brought back as reminders, not trophies. The clock did its even work. Rain traced the window, quieter now, like a hand smoothing the wrinkles from a tablecloth. Somewhere in the street, a car rolled by and dissolved into distance. I breathed in the time and the calm. The case was not about a man named in song. It was about the hands who made and the hands who remembered. I let the thought sit like a stone warmed by sun. And now there is nothing left to solve. Only the night remains, and it is generous. The rain outside turns steady, a kind metronome. It strokes the olive leaves in a rhythm you do not have to count. A lamp glows on a side table, not bright, not dim, just enough to make the room into a safe harbor. Penelope's breath deepens until it is almost a purr. Even thunder, far away, chooses to murmur instead of shout, a lion behind stone deciding to rest its head. Imagine the hill of Mycenae in that same rain. The lion gate darkens and shines in turns, its relief waiting, its gaze untroubled. Beyond the gate, the graves lie quiet under their blankets of earth and time. In the museum, a case gathers a thin veil of night over gold that remembers hands. The mask rests. It does not need to be anyone else anymore. It is exactly what it is. A face at rest who remembered smiling. You can match your breathing to a sound that never quite leaves the air there. Tap, glide, tap, and rest. That was the music of Chrysion's hammer, the tap to shape, the glide to soften, the tap to seal the line. Inhale on the tap, exhale on the glide. Let the rest be the small pause your body understands without thinking. Tap, glide, tap, and rest. If a thought asks for your attention, you can give it a chair and let it sit by the window. The rain will speak to it for you. If a worry knocks on the door, you can open it and show it the quiet room where nothing needs fixing. The worry will understand. Even worries like museums. They have labels there and benches. Feel the chair beneath you. It holds you without asking questions. The blanket, if you have one, warms your knees in the way that makes your shoulders drop of their own accord. Soft sounds in the house agree to be softer. The night outside is large, but your room is exactly the right size. Breathe in a hint of time, green and clean, a memory of hills warmed by sun. Breathe out everything from today that does not need to cross into sleep. The day can wait in the hallway. It has nowhere else to be. The thunder rolls again, farther now, like a story told in another room. The lamp keeps its gentle watch. The rain is patient. You're allowed to stop holding the thread of the plot. I will hold it for you. It will be right here in the morning, tied in a neat knot at the end. Down in Greece, when the last visitor leaves and the guard locks the glass with an even hand, the mask does not mind the dark. It was made to be quiet. It was made to keep a face. It has kept it well. Somewhere in your chest, the same kind of keeping happens. Your breath arrives. It pauses. It goes on. There is nothing you have to do but let it. If you wish, you can place the lion gate at the threshold of your own sleep. 2 lions looking inward, not to keep you out, but to keep you in, safe and easy. Beyond them, a path goes down into soft dark. It smells like rain and stone and a little beeswax. The steps are steady, even in the dream. The air is cool and the ground is kind. Tap, glide, tap, and rest. Good night, dear friend. May your sleep be older than worry and lighter than gold.